Most people try to build teams and choose relationships by looking at skills, talents, or convenience. But that's why so many teams fall apart, and so many relationships feel heavy instead of energizing. The real question, the one almost no one stops to ask, is why? Why do you get out of bed every morning? Why does your work matter? Why do you want people around you in the first place? If you're not connected by a shared purpose, you're just a group of individuals standing in the same room. But when you build a team or choose relationships through the lens of your why, everything changes. Trust becomes natural, communication becomes honest, and loyalty becomes effortless. There is nothing more urgent today than surrounding yourself with people who believe what you believe, because the world moves too fast to do it alone. Your why is not just a compass, it is a filter. And using that filter will determine whether you are merely surviving or building something that can truly thrive. The reason most men struggle to build strong teams or choose the right people for close relationships is because they start with the what and the how instead of the why. Men naturally evaluate actions, behavior, and results: who performs well, who shows up, who looks reliable on the surface. But none of that guarantees loyalty, support, or alignment. When a man begins with his why, he stops looking for people who simply function and starts looking for people who believe what he believes. And from a woman's perspective, this shift is magnetic, because purpose is the one thing that makes a man predictable in the best way. The truth is that men are often taught to keep their purpose quiet, to act strong, and to avoid showing the deeper reason behind their drive. But when a man shows his why, it becomes a signal, clear, bold, and impossible to misread. Other men recognize it as direction, and women recognize it as stability. People can follow strength, but they can only commit to purpose. When a man chooses relationships through the lens of his why, he stops trying to impress and starts trying to align, and alignment creates a level of clarity that no charm or skill set can ever replicate. The mistake men make when choosing people for their inner circle is assuming that shared interests or shared goals are enough. They aren't. Interests change, and goals shift with seasons. But a shared why, shared values, shared beliefs, shared meaning, that is the foundation, unshakable connection. From a male perspective, this means choosing people who don't just cheer for your wins, but believe in the reason you're trying to win in the first place. From a woman's perspective, this means recognizing which men are driven by genuine purpose and which are driven by insecurity masked as ambition. The tension many men feel comes from surrounding themselves with people who like them but don't understand them. Men often tolerate this because it feels comfortable, familiar, or easy, but comfort isn't connection. A man's why exposes the difference quickly. People who don't align will pull him sideways, slow him down, or drain his clarity. People who do align will accelerate him, sharpen him, and make his purpose stronger. Women especially respond to this. They gravitate not to a man who knows everything, but to a man who knows himself. The selective power of starting with why drastically changes the kind of people a man allows close to him. Instead of choosing teammates, partners, or friends based on convenience, history, or attraction, he begins choosing based on resonance. Men become more decisive, more intentional, and less likely to settle for relationships that take more than they give. Women, in return, experience a man who stands for something, not just someone who stands beside someone. The simplest truth about a man's relationships is that he either chooses them through pressure or through purpose. Starting with why forces him to choose through purpose. It becomes the filter that separates people who weaken his mission from people who amplify it. This is the moment when a man stops trying to fit into a group and starts building one. The most overlooked truth in a man's life is that belief, not talent, not personality, not compatibility, is what determines who truly stands with him. Men often assume that if someone is supportive, helpful, or present, that person is automatically part of their team. But presence does not equal alignment. A man's real team is made up of those who believe in the same deeper purpose he does, because only belief creates loyalty that survives conflict, pressure, and change. Women see this more clearly than men do, because they instinctively feel the difference between someone who is aligned with a man's purpose and someone who is simply orbiting around him. The psychology behind this is simple. Men crave respect, but they often accept agreement instead. Agreement is easy. People agree for comfort, approval, or personal gain. Belief, however, is earned. When someone believes what a man believes, support becomes instinctive instead of conditional. This is why a man will always feel more energized around people who share his purpose than around people who simply like him. Women notice this in relationships too. They can sense when a man is surrounded by people who strengthen his direction versus people who distract him from it. A woman is more likely to trust a man who is supported by aligned individuals because it signals that his life is built on meaning, not chaos. The most common trap men fall into is confusing skill-based partnerships with belief-based partnerships. A person may be competent, productive, or charismatic, but still be misaligned at the core. This misalignment eventually shows up as friction, misunderstanding, and silent competition. When a man builds his circle only on talent, he builds a fragile structure that collapses the moment pressure rises. But when he builds it on shared beliefs, he creates something resilient. People who stay when it's hard, tell the truth when it's needed, and fight for the mission because it matters to them personally. Women find this kind of circle profoundly attractive because it reflects emotional maturity and direction. The difference becomes even clearer when a man makes decisions under stress. In these moments, people who don't share his beliefs will question why he's pushing so hard, why he's sacrificing, or why he refuses to compromise. They cannot understand the purpose behind his actions because they don't feel it. But those who believe what he believes don't need explanations. They move with him naturally. This is the psychology of trust at its core. Real trust is not built on agreements, but on shared meaning. Women interpret this alignment as stability because it shows that the man is not alone in his mission and that his direction is affirmed by the people closest to him. The reality is that a man's why acts as a torch, and only people who carry their own flame will walk beside him without dimming his. Men who surround themselves with belief-aligned individuals experience fewer doubts, fewer conflicts, and deeper loyalty. Women who observe this see a man who chooses his circle with intention, not desperation. When people believe what he believes, they don't just follow him, they build with him. And when they don't, he may have people around him, but he does not have a team. The biggest misunderstanding men have about chemistry is believing it's something mysterious or unpredictable, as if it randomly appears between people who happen to get along. But real chemistry is not a coincidence. It is the natural reaction that happens when two or more people share the same purpose. Men often mistake instant comfort or shared interests for compatibility, while women tend to look deeper, sensing whether a man's direction aligns with their own internal compass. Chemistry is not created by personality, it's created by purpose. The reason this matters so much is because men are conditioned to evaluate relationships based on how well things work rather than why they work. A man might feel connected to someone who laughs at his jokes, supports his ideas, or enjoys the same things he does, but those are surface-level signals. Shared purpose runs underneath all of that. When two people believe in the same values, the same vision, the same meaning, their communication becomes effortless and their trust becomes intuitive. Women pick up on this effortlessly. They feel when a man's purpose aligns with theirs long before he says it out loud. The dynamic between men becomes even more revealing. When men interact, they often bond through activity, work, sports, shared challenges. But the deepest male bonds come not from doing things together, but from believing in something together. This is why a man can meet someone who shares his purpose and immediately feel understood in a way even long-term friends sometimes fail to achieve. For women observing him, this kind of alignment signals emotional grounding and direction, traits that are far more attractive than surface-level charm or confidence. The reason chemistry feels powerful is because purpose creates emotional safety. When someone believes what you believe, you don't have to explain your motives, defend your intentions, or hide your weaknesses. Men rarely admit it, but they crave this kind of safety, someone who understands their ambition, their fears, and their mission without judgment. Women, on the other hand, are highly attuned to whether a man can create this safety through clarity of purpose. When he can, chemistry becomes a natural response rather than something that has to be manufactured. The moments when chemistry fades are just as telling. It fades when values are misaligned, when purpose is unclear, or when someone's actions move in the opposite direction of their beliefs. Men often misinterpret this as losing interest or falling out of sync. But the real cause is simpler. The foundation was never shared purpose. It was temporary connection. Women sense this misalignment earlier. because they intuitively recognize when a man is acting from pressure rather than purpose. The most powerful relationships, professional or personal, form when purpose is shared and expressed openly. Men who speak their why attract people who resonate with it, and that resonance is what becomes chemistry. Women respond deeply to men who live with intention because it creates a rhythm, a stability, and a direction that feels trustworthy. Chemistry, at its core, is two people moving toward the same meaning, not just toward each other. The greatest misconception men carry is believing that trust is built on competence, on how good someone is, how consistent they appear, or how effectively they perform. But trust doesn't grow from matching skill sets, it grows from matching purpose. Men respect skill, but they open up to purpose. Women understand this instinctively because they don't judge trustworthiness by what a man can do, but by what drives him to do it. Trust is emotional, not mechanical, and purpose is what anchors those emotions in something real. The real challenge for men is that they're trained to evaluate people by output. A man looks at whether someone delivers, whether they show up, whether they fit the role. But none of those things guarantee trust. Skill can be hired, learned, or faked. Purpose cannot. When someone shares a man's why, trust forms without force because their intentions don't need to be questioned. From a woman's point of view, this is why a man with clear purpose feels safer. His actions match his internal compass, creating reliability that no level of talent can substitute. The reason aligned purpose creates stronger trust is because it shapes behavior under pressure. Anyone can look trustworthy when things are easy. It's when tension rises that true alignment shows. Skills may help someone perform, but purpose determines whether they stay loyal, stay honest, and stay committed. Men often discover too late that the people they trusted for their abilities abandon them when circumstances shift. Women see this pattern often and are quick to recognize whether the people around a man are bonded to his mission or only benefiting from his momentum. The psychology behind this runs deeper than most men admit. Men crave people they can rely on without having to constantly watch their backs. But reliability isn't a product of efficiency. It's a product of shared belief. When someone moves through life with the same guiding principle, their behavior becomes predictable in the best possible way. Women interpret this as stability, because a man surrounded by aligned individuals functions with greater emotional clarity, confidence, and direction. The contrast becomes clear when men interact with people who match their skills but not their purpose. There's tension, miscommunication, unspoken competition. Effort replaces ease. A man may feel supported on the surface, yet internally sense that something is off. That feeling is not paranoia, it's awareness. It's the subconscious warning that alignment is missing. Women often voice this before men do, noticing when someone's presence disrupts a man's energy rather than strengthening it. The relationships that make a man stronger are the ones anchored in a shared belief about why the work, the mission, or the connection matters. Skills can complement each other, but purpose unites. Men who build teams or relationships based on aligned purpose find trust growing naturally, without fear or second guessing. Women respond deeply to this because it signals a man who chooses with intention rather than convenience. Trust becomes effortless when purpose is shared, because aligned purpose turns strangers into allies, and allies into family. The most defining choice a man makes in his life is who he allows close enough to influence his sense of purpose. Men like to believe they are independent, unaffected, and self-driven, but the truth is that the people closest to a man either reinforce his why or slowly erode it. From a woman's perspective, this influence is obvious. She can see when a man is surrounded by people who elevate his direction or people who shrink it. A man's why is powerful, but it is not immune to the company he keeps, and choosing people who make that purpose stronger is the difference between becoming who he is meant to be and becoming a diluted version of himself. The reason this matters so much is because men often underestimate how deeply relationships shape their identity. A man may think he's choosing friends, partners, or teammates, but he's actually choosing the environment in which his purpose will either grow or suffocate. When a man is around people who don't respect his why, he becomes smaller without realizing it. He stops speaking as boldly. He hesitates more. He doubts the very mission that once felt natural to him. Women notice this shift instantly. It changes his energy, his confidence, his clarity. And from a female perspective, A man who chooses the wrong environment is a man who loses himself. The psychology behind this runs deeper than most men openly acknowledge. Men are wired to protect their pride, so they often ignore how much the opinions of those around them influence their decisions. But purpose requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires the right people. When a man shares his why with those who don't value it, he feels exposed instead of supported. This creates a pattern of shrinking, hiding, or softening his purpose just to avoid friction. Women, however, are highly attuned to whether a man's environment empowers him or restricts him, because it directly affects how he shows up emotionally and relationally. The people who make a man's why stronger are the ones who challenge him in alignment, not opposition. These are individuals who push him to grow without pushing him off his path. They don't demand he change his purpose, they demand he live up to it. Men rarely realize how rare this kind of support is until they experience it. Women instinctively respect a man who surrounds himself with people like this because it signals strength, humility, and wisdom, qualities that make him more grounded and more attractive. The subtle danger lies in people who seem supportive but quietly weaken a man's purpose. They encourage comfort over growth, applause over honesty, and convenience over direction. Men often misinterpret this as loyalty or care, but it is actually enabling. Over time, these relationships drain a man's ambition and make his why feel heavier than it should. Women see through this quickly. They can tell when a man is becoming smaller to keep someone else comfortable. And nothing is more painful to witness than a man who abandons his purpose to preserve a relationship. The most transformative relationships, whether friendships, partnerships, or team connections, are the ones where a man's why becomes sharper and more resilient. These people don't just understand his purpose, they amplify it. They remind him who he is, especially when he forgets. They challenge him without belittling him, support him without controlling him, and believe in his mission even when he doubts himself. Women feel safer, more connected, and more trusting with a man who is surrounded by people who strengthen his why, because it reveals consistency, resilience, and a sense of direction that cannot be faked. The truth is that a man's why becomes stronger when he chooses people who believe in the best version of him and refuse to settle for anything less. His purpose grows in the presence of those who honor it, and it diminishes around those who fear it. The people he chooses ultimately determine the height of his impact, because no man becomes extraordinary in the company of those who prefer him ordinary. The most powerful predictor of a man's future is the people he chooses to keep around him. Men often believe their discipline, ambition, or hard work will determine their destiny, but the truth is that their environment shapes them faster than their decisions do. A man becomes the attitudes he absorbs, the values he witnesses, and the standards he normalizes. From a woman's perspective, nothing reveals a man's direction more clearly than his circle. She can see whether he surrounds himself with people who elevate him or people who quietly derail him. A man's circle is not just a reflection of where he is, it is a preview of where he is going. The challenge is that most men don't choose their circle intentionally. They choose based on proximity, history, convenience, or familiarity. They allow people into their lives simply because they've always been there or because it feels comfortable. But comfort is not the same as alignment. A man's why requires intentionality, not autopilot. When a man chooses his relationships without filtering them through his purpose, he ends up carrying people who were never meant to walk alongside him. Women feel the weight of this more deeply than men do because they experience the emotional consequences of a man being pulled away from his mission by the wrong influences. The psychology behind intentional filtering lies in a man's need for clarity and direction. Men thrive when they know where they're going and who they're becoming, but that clarity gets clouded when surrounded by people who don't share the same values. A misaligned circle creates internal conflict, a quiet tension that leaves a man torn between his potential and his environment. Men often internalize this as stress, lack of motivation, or emotional numbness without realizing the source is relational misalignment. Women, however, are highly attuned to shifts in a man's emotional presence and can instantly detect when his circle is dragging him off course. The people a man surrounds himself with either sharpen his purpose or dull it. Those who sharpen it challenge him in the right direction, encourage him to grow, and hold him accountable to the man he says he wants to be. They don't let him shrink his vision out of fear or convenience. Those who dull it, however, pull him toward comfort, excuses, and mediocrity. They reward short-term pleasure instead of long-term growth. Men often confuse this comfort for loyalty, but women can see the difference clearly. She knows when a man's circle feeds his confidence or feeds his complacency. The impact of a man's circle is most visible during moments of weakness. When life tests him, his purpose becomes vulnerable, and the people closest to him either stabilize him or destabilize him. A supportive circle reminds him of who he is and why he started. A misaligned one pushes him into doubt, resentment, or escape. Men frequently underestimate how much their inner circle influences their identity during these moments. Women, on the other hand, watch closely because how a man behaves under pressure reveals the integrity of his environment. The reason filtering with intention matters is because every person in a man's life occupies space, mental space, emotional space, and sometimes even spiritual space. A man cannot carry everyone and still chase a purpose that demands focus. He must choose people who amplify his why, not distract from it. Women trust men who curate their circle intentionally because it signals maturity, emotional intelligence, and a commitment to personal growth. It shows that he values his future enough to protect the relationships that shape it. The life a man builds is a direct reflection of the people he allows closest to him. His circle influences his standards, his decisions, his habits, and his vision. Each person either pushes him forward or pulls him backward. This is why filtering with intention is not a luxury, it is a responsibility. A man's future depends on the quality of the people he gives access to his time, his energy, and his purpose. His mission grows or withers based on who he lets walk beside him.